The Marines hid her rifle, a cruel, petty joke meant for a supply clerk they thought had no business being at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. They did not know that for Anya Sharma, a rifle was not a piece of issued equipment but an extension of her will. They did not know that you could take her tool, but you could not take her trade. And so, as the impossible shot presented itself and the command staff panicked, she would build another rifle from their scrap and their refuse, and she would outshoot them all. It was not a matter of pride. It was a matter of purpose. This 47 Chinook descended upon FOB Kestrel like a furious god, its twin rotors churning the high-altitude Afghan dust into a blinding, stinging storm. The Marines on the landing zone, hardened by months of deployment, hunched their shoulders and shielded their eyes, their movements practiced and weary. When the rear ramp lowered, they expected replacements, fresh-faced lieutenants, or maybe a visiting dignitary. They did not expect the woman who walked down the ramp alone. She was in her early 50s, her face a mask of serene neutrality etched with lines that spoke of sun and sleepless nights, not of office work. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe, disciplined bun, with threads of silver at the temples. She wore simple, unmarked fatigues, the fabric faded to the color of the surrounding mountains. In her hand, she carried a long, heavy-looking pelican case. She moved with an unnerving economy of motion, her boots finding purchase on the gravel without a single slip, her body steady against the hurricane of rotor wash that made younger, stronger men stagger. No one greeted her. A lance corporal with a clipboard glanced at her, saw no rank, no unit patch, and promptly looked away, shouting for the pallet of MREs to be unloaded. To them, she was an anomaly, a ghost. A linguist, perhaps, a cultural advisor, a problem for someone else to deal with. Anya Sharma was accustomed to being underestimated. It was a form of camouflage she had learned to wear as comfortably as her fatigues. She stood for a moment, letting the dust settle. Her eyes, a dark and penetrating brown, did not scan the faces of the Marines. They scanned the ridgelines. Her gaze traced the jagged peaks that formed the narrow valley, noting the natural funnels for wind, the patches of loose scree, the subtle changes in color that indicated different rock densities. She absently licked her lips, tasting the grit and the air, gauging the humidity. An internal calculation, as natural to her as breathing, had already begun. Wind speed, approximately 12 knots gusting to 18, prevailing from the west-northwest. Temperature around 30 degrees Celsius. Altitude just over 2,000 meters. The data flowed into her, cataloged and stored. She walked toward the collection of sand-colored tents and HESCO barriers that constituted the command center, her rifle case held lightly in her left hand. It was not a burden. It was a familiar weight, a silent companion. Young Marines, lean and swaggering, watched her pass. They saw a middle-aged woman, an administrative officer or a civilian contractor, out of her element. A few exchanged smirks. One of them, a corporal with sharp eyes and a restless energy named Tanaka, watched a moment longer than the others. He noticed she didn't look at the ground. Her head was up, her gaze sweeping, assessing. It was the way a predator walked, not a clerk. The thought was absurd, and he dismissed it, turning back to his friends. Anya found the command tent. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and nervous energy. A large man with a perfectly starched uniform and the silver eagles of a colonel pinned to his collar stood before a bank of monitors displaying satellite imagery. He was shouting at a captain about patrol logistics. She waited. She did not clear her throat or shift her weight. She simply stood in the entrance, a silent, unmoving presence, until the colonel's tirade wound down. He finally turned, his eyes sweeping over her with immediate, unconcealed dismissal. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Colonel Marcus Thorne's voice was a low growl, honed by years of command. The ma'am was not a sign of respect. It was a label, a way of categorizing her as something other, something civilian, something soft. "Colonel Thorne," Anya said, her voice quiet but carrying easily through the tent. "I was instructed to report to you." Thorne's eyebrows, thick and graying, drew together. He looked her up and down again. No weapon, no rank, just the anonymous fatigues and the inscrutable face. Report to me for what? Are you the new quartermaster clerk? We requested a master sergeant. My orders are for observation and support. Sir, she held out a slim, sealed folder. Thorn took it reluctantly, as if it might soil his hands. He broke the seal and scanned the single page inside. His expression soured. The orders were maddeningly vague, originating from a level of command so high it was almost abstract. Anya Sharma is assigned to FOB Kestrel under your operational command. Provide necessary support. Her role is advisory. It was signed by a 4-star general he had never met. Advisory, Thorn scoffed, handing the folder back. Advisory on what? The quality of the chow. The morale of the laundry and bath detail. He was a man who understood chain of command, firepower, and troop movements. He did not understand advisors without portfolios. She was a disruption to his meticulously ordered world. On whatever you need, Colonel, Anya replied, her tone unwavering. Thorn's jaw tightened. He saw this as a slight from high command, some desk-bound general saddling him with a useless civilian observer in the middle of a war zone. Right, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Well, advisory. Find yourself a bunk in the overflow quarters with the transients. Stay out of the operational areas. Stay out of the way of my Marines. If I need advice on floral arrangements for the mess hall, I'll be sure to send for you. He turned his back on her, a clear and final dismissal. The other officers in the tent took their cue, pointedly ignoring her. Anya stood for a moment longer, her dark eyes resting on the back of the colonel's rigid neck. She saw the tension there, the brittle pride of a man who believed control was the same as competence. Then, she turned and walked out, the heavy rifle case a silent counterpoint to the colonel's bluster. Outside, she saw Corporal Tanaka and his friends again. They had heard the exchange. Their smirks had widened into open grins. They saw her as their commander did, a joke, a piece of administrative baggage. The disrespect was a physical presence, a thick, cloying smoke in the thin mountain air. It did not touch her. Anya Sharma did not stay out of the way. She simply became invisible. For the next week, she was a peripheral figure, a ghost on the edge of the FOB's bustling life. She found a cot in a noisy, drafty tent filled with soldiers in transit, and in the chaos, she found her solitude. Her routine was simple and methodical. She rose before the sun, when the air was cold and sharp and the generators had not yet drowned out the whisper of the wind. She would take a position on the western perimeter, near a crumbling stone wall from some forgotten conflict, and she would watch the valley awaken. She didn't use the powerful spotting scopes of the sniper teams. She used a small, unassuming pair of German-made binoculars, their lenses pristine. She wasn't looking for enemy fighters. She was studying the atmosphere. She watched the way the morning sun struck the eastern ridgeline, creating thermal currents that would lift the air. She watched the dust devils dance and die in the valley floor, noting their direction and duration. She watched the Kestrel Hawks, for which the base was named, ride the invisible rivers of air, their effortless adjustments a perfect map of the wind's complex behavior. She made small, meticulous notes in a waterproof notebook, sketching diagrams of airflow and noting barometric pressure changes she seemed to sense in her own bones. In the mess hall, she sat alone, eating slowly and deliberately. But her attention was never on her food. It was on the conversations around her. She listened to the pilots complain about unpredictable crosswinds on their approach vectors. She listened to the infantry squads talk about the strange acoustics in certain canyons, where a shout could be heard a mile away or swallowed up in a few feet. She heard the base's primary sniper team, led by a cocky staff sergeant named Gallo, bragging about their new rifles, their state-of-the-art optics, their ballistic computers. Gallo and his spotter were the kings of the base, treated with a reverence usually reserved for ace pilots. Anya watched them, noting the swagger, the confidence bordering on arrogance. She saw the way Gallo held his rifle like a trophy. She saw the slight tremor in his partner's hands after too much coffee. She filed it all away, Corporal Tanaka began to notice her. At first, it was a game for him and his friends. Spot the spook, they'd call it. They'd see her by the motor pool, studying the wear patterns on Humvee tires. They'd see her near the ammo depot, her head tilted as if listening to the resonant frequency of the stacked crates. But Tanaka's amusement began to curdle into a strange curiosity. Her observation wasn't idle. It was intense, focused. He was a scout sniper candidate himself, taught to observe, but his methods were clumsy compared to hers. He watched for movement, for threats. She seemed to be watching the world itself, learning its fundamental rules. One afternoon, he saw her at the makeshift firing range at the far end of the base. She wasn't shooting. She had her rifle case open. Tanaka edged closer, trying to get a look. The rifle inside was unlike any he had ever seen. It wasn't a standard-issue M40 or a newer Mk13. The stock was a dark, polished wood, custom-carved to fit a smaller frame. The action was a deep, matte blue, and the barrel was thick, fluted, and bore no manufacturer's markings. It looked less like a military weapon and more like a luthier's masterpiece. She was not cleaning it. She had a small toolkit laid out on a cloth and was making microscopic adjustments to the trigger assembly, her movements as precise as a surgeon's. Gallo and his team walked by. "Hey, Grandma, you planning on shooting that museum piece?" Gallo called out, laughing. Anya didn't look up. "Just checking the tolerances," she said quietly. "Tolerances?" Gallo laughed again. "Lady, just point and shoot. The computer does the rest." He tapped the side of his own rifle's advanced scope. "Maybe you should stick to filing paperwork." His team snickered and moved on. Anya continued her work, her expression unchanged. But Tanaka saw her fingers pause for a fraction of a second. He felt a prickle of something he couldn't name. Felt like watching someone mock a sleeping tiger. He backed away quietly. The image of that strange, beautiful rifle and the woman's focused calm burned into his mind. He was beginning to suspect that Colonel Thorne, Staff Sergeant Gallo, and everyone else on this base had made a profound and dangerous mistake. The pressure began as a whisper, a static-laced fragment of intelligence from a signal's intercept. It grew to a murmur in the command tent, then a roar. The target was a man known only as the Alchemist, not a warlord, but something far more dangerous. A master bombmaker and chemist who had engineered a new generation of undetectable explosives. He was a ghost, a legend who had been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of coalition soldiers. And now, for the first time in 3 years, they had a location. Intel confirmed that the Alchemist would be meeting 2 of his top lieutenants at a ruined caravanserai in the Zerenko Valley, a place of jagged cliffs and treacherous winds. The meeting was in 2 days. The opportunity was golden, but the problem was a nightmare of physics and geography. Colonel Thorne stood before the holographic map table, his face a grim mask. The caravanserai was visible as a small, pixelated cluster of ruins. "What's the range from the nearest viable overwatch?" he demanded. A young lieutenant, sweating despite the air conditioning, pointed to a ridge on the opposite side of a massive canyon. "Sir, the best possible position is observation point Vulture. Line of sight is clear, but the range is 2,250 meters. A heavy silence fell over the tent. Over 2 kilometers. It was a monumental distance, on the bleeding edge of what was considered possible even under perfect conditions. And conditions are not perfect, the base meteorologist added, his voice strained. A pre-monsoon squall line is moving in from the north. We're forecasting high winds, erratic and multi-directional, gusting up to 60 knots through that canyon. Visibility will be dropping in and out. It's a maelstrom." Thorne's fist clenched. "Gallo," he barked. "What's the effective range of your Mk13? Staff Sergeant Gallo, who had been summoned to the command tent, stepped forward, his usual swagger absent. "Sir, with the 300 Winchester Magnum best-case scenario, we can reliably engage out to 1,500 meters. Maybe 1,800 on a good day. Over 200 in a windstorm. Sir, that's not a shot. That's a lottery ticket." "I'm not asking you to buy a ticket, Sergeant. I'm giving you an order, Thorne snarled. I want you and your team on that ridge. You will take the shot. Colonel, getting to OP Vulture is another problem. The captain from the earlier briefing interjected. The direct route is mined, and the long way around is exposed to spotter positions on the eastern peaks. The enemy knows we use that ridge. They'll be watching it. Panic began to fray the edges of the tense military discipline. Voices grew louder, arguing over impossible air assault options and suicidal ground approaches. The window to kill the alchemist was closing, and every option was a dead end. Thorne's face was pale with fury and desperation. This was the opportunity of his career, the one that would define his command, and it was slipping through his fingers. He was a man drowning in variables he could not control. Into this vortex of rising chaos, a quiet voice spoke from the entrance of the tent. I can make the shot. Every head turned. Anya Sharma stood there, her hands empty, her posture calm. She had been drawn by the escalating tension, a predator sensing distress. The room was utterly silent for a moment. Then someone snickered. Colonel Thorne's head snapped toward her, his face a thundercloud of rage. Get out of my command post, he hissed. I will not have my time wasted by administrative staff playing soldier. The range is 2,250 meters, Anya stated, as if he hadn't spoken. The primary challenge isn't distance. It's the wind shear in the first 800 meters as it crosses the canyon floor, and the updraft on the target side. The bullet will be in the air for over 4 seconds. You have to account for Coriolis effect, spin drift, and the changing air density across the trajectory. She wasn't asking. She was diagnosing. The technical precision of her statement stunned the room into another silence. Gallo stared at her, his jaw slack. She had just summarized the impossible physics of the problem more clearly than his own ballistic computer could. Thorne's fury was now mixed with a grudging, infuriated flicker of something else. He was being lectured by the woman he'd assigned to floral arrangements. And you propose to solve this complex aerodynamic equation with what exactly? A strongly worded memo? With my rifle, Anya said simply. Your museum piece? Gallo stammered, finding his voice. It's zeroed for this altitude, she replied, her gaze steady. I just need a spotter and a clear firing position on the southwest perimeter. Thorne stared at her, a war raging behind his eyes. The sheer audacity of it was galling. But the calm, absolute certainty in her voice was a stark contrast to the barely controlled panic in his tent. He was out of options. His career was on the line. Humiliating this woman was a risk he was suddenly willing to take if it meant there was a 1 in a million chance she was right. Fine, he spat. Fine. You want to play sniper? Go get your rifle. The entire command staff will be there to witness this attempt. And when you fail, I'll have you on the next transport back to whatever godforsaken desk you crawled out from under. Anya gave a single, sharp nod. She turned and walked toward her tent, her stride unhurried. The officers in the command tent watched her go, a mixture of scorn and a new, unsettling curiosity on their faces. This was no longer just about the mission. It had become a trial. Anya walked into the transient tent and went to her cot. She knelt and reached for the pelican case tucked underneath. Her fingers brushed the latches and she paused. The latches were closed, but they felt different. Looser. A cold stillness settled over her. She flipped the 4 clasps open and lifted the lid. The case was empty. The custom-cut foam, molded perfectly to the shape of her rifle, her scope, her tools held nothing but air. Her rifle, the companion of 1,000 lonely vigils, the instrument she knew better than her own hands, was gone. She didn't gasp. She didn't curse. She simply knelt there, her gaze fixed on the empty space. A deep, glacial anger, cold and heavy, began to form in her chest. This wasn't the random theft of an opportunist. This was personal. It was a message, a prank born of arrogance and disrespect. Her eyes flickered toward the cots belonging to Corporal Tanaka and his friends. They were empty, but she could almost feel the lingering scent of their cheap bravado. They hadn't just hidden a piece of equipment. They had taken her voice. They had taken her hands. Colonel Thorne, growing impatient, stormed out of the command tent and saw her emerge from the overflow quarters, empty-handed. A cruel, triumphant smile touched his lips. "Problem, advisory?" he called out, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Misplace your weapon? Highly unprofessional. I guess that concludes your little demonstration." Anya's eyes met his across the dusty expanse. There was no panic in them, no defeat. There was a flinty hardness that made the colonel's smile falter. She said nothing. She didn't accuse the young Marines. She didn't complain or make excuses. To do so would be to admit they had power over her. Instead, she turned and began walking, not toward the command tent to admit failure, but in the opposite direction, toward the deafening roar of the motor pool and the adjacent scrap heap, the boneyard where broken machines and discarded parts went to die. Her purpose had not changed. Only the tool needed to be forged anew. The shift began in the boneyard. The Marines who had gathered to watch her public humiliation followed at a distance, expecting a breakdown, or perhaps a petulant retreat. Colonel Thorne stood with his arms crossed, a thunderous expression on his face, waiting for the charade to end. They saw Anya walk past wrecked Humvees and cannibalized generators to a pile of discarded weaponry. Her eyes scanned the twisted metal with an appraiser's focus. She ignored the rifles with salvageable parts and went straight to a rusted, forgotten M40A1, a relic from a previous generation. Its wooden stock was cracked and its barrel was bent into a distinct curve from being run over by a vehicle. It was useless junk. She picked it up, however, and with a series of deft movements, field-stripped it in seconds. She discarded the stock, the barrel, the trigger group. She kept only the heart of the weapon. The Remington 700 action, its steel still sound beneath the rust. Next, she moved to a pallet of condemned heavy weapon parts. Her gaze fell upon the barrel of an M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, discarded due to heat warping near the chamber. It was absurdly heavy, a solid pole of ordnance steel. She hefted it, judging its weight and balance. The bore was far too large for any sniper round, but the quality of the metal, forged to withstand immense pressures, was exactly what she needed. Carrying the rifle action in one hand and dragging the monstrous barrel with the other, she walked toward the machine shop, a large Quonset hut filled with lathes, presses, and welding gear. The master sergeant in charge, a grizzled mechanic named Peterson with hands permanently stained with grease, saw her coming and blocked the entrance. "Whoa there, ma'am. That's a restricted area. What in the hell are you doing with that junk?" Anya didn't argue. She laid the action and the barrel on the ground. "I need to use your lathe," she said. "And your barrel press." Peterson laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You need to? Lady, this ain't a high school shop class. You could lose a hand on that equipment." Without a word, Anya picked up a piece of scrap aluminum and a carbide scribe from a nearby bench. In less than a minute, with clean, precise lines, she sketched a technical diagram. It showed the M2 barrel being turned down on a lathe to a specific contour, then rebored, chambered for a 338 Lapua Magnum cartridge, and threaded to fit the M40's action. The drawing included precise measurements, tolerances down to 1/1000th of an inch, and notes on the required cutting speed for that specific grade of steel. She handed the sketch to Peterson. He looked at it, his derisive smile slowly vanishing. He looked from the impossibly detailed drawing to the quiet woman standing before him. He had been a machinist for 30 years. The plans she had scribbled on a piece of trash were at a master gunsmith's level. It was work he himself would have struggled to complete. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice now quiet, stripped of its earlier mockery. "A long time ago," Anya said. "May I?" Peterson stepped aside. "The shop is yours," he said, his tone filled with a new, dawning respect. By now a crowd had gathered. Corporal Tanaka and his friends, the ones who had hidden her rifle, stood at the front, their faces pale. The prank had spiraled into something terrifyingly real. They had expected her to fail, to be humiliated. They had not expected this raw, methodical display of creation. For the next 2 hours, the machine shop became a theater. Anya Sharma moved with a focused grace that was mesmerizing. She mounted the heavy barrel in the lathe, and the machine, which had bucked and screamed under less experienced hands, purred under her control. Shavings of steel peeled away in perfect, iridescent ribbons as she turned the barrel down to a heavy bull contour. She selected a drill bit and began the painstaking process of reboring the barrel, her touch on the controls so sensitive it seemed she could feel the cutter's edge moving through the steel. She didn't use digital calipers. She used an old vernier scale, her eyes reading the infinitesimal marks with practiced ease. She chambered the barrel, using hand reamers for the final, critical cut. She crowned the muzzle with a file and a polishing stone, ensuring a perfect exit for the bullet. For the stock, she scavenged a slab of aluminum from the floor plate of a wrecked MRAP and composite armor plating from a door. Using a plasma cutter and a grinder, she shaped the pieces not for beauty, but for function. The result was a brutalist, angular chassis, ugly to the eye but perfectly fitted to her small frame, with an adjustable cheek riser she fashioned from a hinge and a piece of scrap polymer. The Marines watched in utter silence. Their mockery had long since evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of awe. They were watching a sorcerer at work, building a weapon of impossible power from their garbage. Tanaka felt a knot of shame and fear tighten in his stomach. He hadn't just played a prank on a clerk. He had desecrated the temple of a master. The woman they had dismissed as a paper pusher was a craftsman of the highest order, and her craft was the art of killing. The final challenge was the optic. Her custom scope was gone with her rifle. She walked to the engineering tent and found what she was looking for. A high-powered survey theodolite, its primary lens cracked. She gently disassembled it, salvaging the internal prisms and the intact magnification lenses. Back in the machine shop, she built a new housing from a piece of aluminum tubing, carefully seating the lenses and calibrating them by eye, using a distant radio antenna as a focal point. She machined her own scope rings and mounted the grotesque, oversized contraption onto her newly built rifle. When she was finished, she held up her creation. It was a monster, a Frankenstein's rifle, all sharp angles, mismatched metals, and raw, unfinished surfaces. It weighed nearly 30 pounds. It was ugly, brutal, and utterly without compromise. It was perfect. Anya carried the monstrous rifle to the southwest corner of the base perimeter, the spot she had identified days earlier. It offered a clear, stable line of sight toward OP Vulture and the target beyond. The wind was howling now, a physical force that tore at clothing and whipped dust into stinging clouds. The sky was a bruised purple-gray. Colonel Thorne was there, his face unreadable. The entire command staff had followed. Staff Sergeant Gallo was present, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of disbelief and professional jealousy. And at Anya's side, looking pale and nervous, was Corporal Tanaka. "I need a spotter," Anya had said, her eyes finding him in the crowd. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Penance. Tanaka had grabbed his spotting scope and his data book, his hands trembling slightly. Anya laid down a simple canvas mat and settled behind the rifle. The motion was fluid, a single, unbroken sequence. The ugly rifle seemed to become a part of her. She adjusted the bipod she'd fashioned from the legs of a broken camera tripod. She chambered a single 338 Lapua Magnum round, one she had acquired from a bewildered supply sergeant who thought she was collecting souvenirs. "Corporal," she said, her voice calm and low, barely audible over the wind. "Give me a wind call." Tanaka raised his Kestrel wind meter. "It's all over the place, ma'am. Reading 35 knots from my 9 o'clock, gusting to 50. That's the local wind," Anya said, her eye already pressed to the strange, oversized scope. "It's irrelevant. The canyon is creating a Venturi effect. The flow is accelerating and shearing. Downrange at 1,000 meters, the wind is full value, right to left, averaging 25 knots. Past that, it hits the far canyon wall and creates a vertical updraft. Call it a hold under of 1 meter for the last 500 inch. Tanaka stared at her, then back at his instruments, which could only measure the wind at their position. What she was describing was impossible to know. It was atmospheric voodoo. He looked through his own powerful spotting scope, trying to read the mirage, but the air was a boiling, distorted mess. I can't confirm that, ma'am," he stammered. "You don't have to," Anya replied. "Just watch for the impact." She began to work the elevation turret on her handmade scope. It had no precise click adjustments. She turned it with a smooth, deliberate pressure, guided by instinct and a lifetime of experience. She consulted no computer. She looked at the sky, at the color of the light, at the way the distant rain was falling. In her mind, a complex equation was being solved, a tapestry of data woven from 1,000 observations. Barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, spin drift, the planet's rotation. It all coalesced into a single firing solution. "Target is visible," Tanaka said, his voice tense. 3 individuals center of the ruins. The one in the middle is wearing a white shalwar kameez. That's him. That's the alchemist. Anya's breathing slowed. The howling wind, the anxious crowd, the colonel's burning stare. It all faded away. Her world narrowed to the circular image in her scope. The image was surprisingly clear, a testament to her work on the lenses. She could see the men talking, their robes flapping wildly in the gale. She applied a staggering amount of windage, aiming at a point that seemed to be dozens of meters to the left of the ruins, into what looked like empty air. Gallo let out an involuntary scoff. It was a ridiculous hold. Anya's finger rested on the trigger she had built and polished herself. She did not wait for a lull in the wind. She waited for a specific pattern in the chaos, a confluence of interacting gusts she had anticipated. She felt it in the pressure on her cheek, in the sound of the air rushing past her ears. There. She exhaled, and the world became still. The trigger broke cleanly. The monstrous rifle bucked against her shoulder, a violent, concussive roar that was deeper and louder than any standard sniper rifle. The recoil was immense, but she absorbed it perfectly, her body a rock-solid platform. The weight was agonizing. 1 second. 2. The bullet was crossing the deepest part of the canyon, fighting the wind. 3 seconds. 4. It was traveling slower now, losing energy, but still spinning at thousands of revolutions per second. Tanaka held his breath, his eye glued to his scope. He was tracking the vapor trail, a faint, ghostly line against the dark mountains. He saw it bend impossibly in the wind, exactly where she said it would. It seemed to be heading far off course. Then, for a fraction of a second, it straightened, caught in a different current. "Impact!" Tanaka screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated shock. "Hit! Good hit! Center mass! Target down!" In his scope, the figure in white had vanished, replaced by a pink mist that was instantly torn away by the wind. The other 2 figures scrambled for cover, disappearing into the ruins. The shot was made. The impossible had been done. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the perimeter. The only sound was the howling of the wind, which now seemed like a respectful applause. The command staff stood frozen, staring at the small woman lying calmly behind the grotesque rifle. Colonel Thorne's face was ashen, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from the distant, unseen target to Anya, his mind unable to process what it had just witnessed. He marched over to her, his boots crunching on the gravel. The condescension, the arrogance, it had all been sandblasted away, leaving only raw, gaping disbelief. "Who are you?" he demanded. The question was not an insult this time. It was a plea, a desperate need to understand the miracle he had just seen. Before Anya could answer, a new voice cut through the air, heavy with the gravel of age and authority. "She's exactly who her papers said she was, Colonel. Observation and support." Everyone turned. Standing near a Humvee that had just pulled up was a master gunnery sergeant. His face a leathery roadmap of deserts and jungles, his eyes holding a weary wisdom. His uniform was faded, his posture relaxed but radiating an unshakable authority that outshone the colonel's rigid bearing. It was Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Vance, a semi-legendary figure in the Logistics Corps, known for getting anything anywhere. Vance walked toward them, his gaze falling on the monstrous rifle Anya had built. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He looked at Anya, not with surprise, but with the warm familiarity of a shared, secret history. "Though we used to call her something else," Vance continued, his eyes twinkling. He turned his attention fully to Thorn. "Colonel, what you just witnessed was a practical demonstration by the lead instructor and sole remaining field operative of the Asymmetric Warfare Group's Project Icarus. It was a very, very small, very classified program from the late 90s. We trained a handful of individuals to be solo, deep-cover interdiction specialists. The goal was to operate with no support, using improvised or captured equipment to execute strategic-level eliminations." He gestured to Anya, who was now calmly ejecting the spent shell casing. Most of the curriculum was theoretical. Most of the candidates washed out. But she was the one who made it real. The one who could build a half-mile rifle out of a drainpipe and a doorknob. In the program, she had a designation. We called her Anjali. The name meant nothing to Thorn, but the weight behind Vance's words was immense. The Ghost Division. Project Icarus. He was looking at a living myth, a relic from a clandestine world of warfare he had only read about in classified after-action reports. The woman he had dismissed, insulted, and tried to sideline was a master of a craft so refined he couldn't even comprehend its edges. The prank with the rifle suddenly seemed like a sacrilege, a child throwing a rock at a cathedral. Thorn looked over at Tanaka and the other young Marines. They stood rigidly at attention, their faces filled with a profound and terrible shame. The truth of their actions had crashed down upon them. They hadn't just bullied a clerk, they had tried to disarm a legend. The atmosphere on FOB Kestrel had undergone a seismic shift. The news of the shot, and the subsequent revelation of Anya's identity, spread not like wildfire, but like a pressure wave, silent and powerful. The story was told in hushed, awed tones in the mess hall, in the barracks, in the maintenance bays. The woman they had ignored was now the subject of a burgeoning myth. Later that day, Corporal Tanaka, his face scrubbed clean and his uniform immaculate, led his small group of friends to the transient tent where Anya was staying. They marched with the stiff formality of men heading to their own execution. In Tanaka's hands was the long pelican case, its surface wiped clean of every speck of dust. They found Anya sitting on her cot, cleaning the ugly, monstrous rifle she had built. She was using a simple pull-through and a patch of oiled cloth, her movements as gentle and focused as if she were tending to a living thing. Tanaka halted his men a respectful 10 feet away. He took a deep breath. "Ma'am," he began, his voice clear and steady, all traces of his earlier swagger gone. He and his men snapped to perfect attention. "There is no excuse for our actions. We behaved with a profound lack of discipline and respect. We dishonored ourselves and this uniform. We are sorry." He stepped forward and held out the rifle case. "We have returned your property, ma'am." Anya stopped her work. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting Tanaka's. She looked at the terrified, ashamed faces of the young Marines behind him. She looked at the pristine case containing her beautiful, familiar rifle. Then her gaze returned to the brutalist weapon resting in her lap. She did not reach for the case. "A tool is just a tool, Corporal," she said, her voice soft but carrying an immense weight. "It's the hand that wields it, and the will behind the hand that matters. You have learned a valuable lesson today about assumptions. Do not forget it." She gave a slight nod. "You're dismissed." It wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder and more valuable. It was a final, indelible lesson. Tanaka swallowed hard, rendered a crisp salute, and backed away, leaving the case on the ground. He and his men departed in silence, their backs straight, their shame now tempered with a sliver of hard-won wisdom. Later, as Anya walked toward the mess hall, the sea of Marines parted for her. Conversations ceased as she passed. It wasn't a fearful silence, but one of deep, reverent respect. No one slapped her on the back. No one offered loud congratulations. They were warriors, and they recognized a master in their midst. The reverence was quiet, unspoken, and absolute. As she neared the command tent, Colonel Thorne stepped out. He was alone. His uniform was still perfect, but the rigid arrogance in his posture was gone, replaced by a weary humility. He stood before her, blocking her path. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply looked at her, the architect of the impossible shot, the ghost from a forgotten program who had saved his command from failure. Then, slowly, with a precision that bespoke the gravity of the gesture, Colonel Marcus Thorne raised his right hand to the brim of his cover and rendered a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier to a master, an acknowledgement of a skill and a spirit that transcended rank. Anya Sharma stopped. She looked at the colonel, and for the first time a flicker of something, not a smile but an understanding, softened the corners of her eyes. She returned the gesture with a single, almost imperceptible nod. The debt of disrespect had been paid in full. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. The setting sun broke through the clouds, bathing the Zerenko Valley in a light of burnished gold. The air was washed clean, and a profound quiet settled over the high mountains. Anya Sharma was alone on the southwest perimeter, not at the firing point, but sitting on the low stone wall where she had spent her first mornings. She was not looking toward the distant ruins. Her gaze was on the horizon, on the play of light and shadow on the peaks. Beside her, resting on a canvas cloth, was the rifle she had built. She had disassembled it completely. Each piece, the reboard barrel, the salvaged action, the brutally functional stock, the strange hybrid scope, was laid out, cleaned and oiled. She was not cleaning her original rifle, which still sat in its case back in her tent. She was tending to the creature of necessity, the instrument born of disrespect. In its ugly, angular lines, she saw a purer reflection of her own identity. It was a weapon of pure function, stripped of all artifice, a testament to the unyielding power of knowledge and will. It was more hers than the beautiful, polished rifle she had carried for years. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn. Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Vance appeared at her side and handed her a steaming metal mug. It was coffee, black and strong. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the last rays of sunlight retreat up the mountain slopes. "They'll be telling stories about that shot for the next 20 years, Vance said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "The 2,200-meter shot in a hurricane with a rifle made of garbage. It's already legend." Anya picked up the heavy barrel, its steel cool to the touch. She sighted down its length, her eye checking the perfect symmetry she had carved into it. She didn't acknowledge the compliment directly. Her world was not one of legends, but of facts, of physics, of a job done. "It was a windy day," she said, the understatement so profound it was almost a form of poetry. Vance chuckled softly. "That it was, Anjali. That it was." She began to reassemble the rifle, her movement sufficient and sure. The pieces came together with satisfying clicks, a harmony of mismatched parts finding their purpose. The setting sun glinted off the oiled steel. There she was, Anya Sharma, a quiet ghost silhouetted against a vast and empty world, a master whose worth was never in doubt, only waiting to be revealed. The ugly rifle, her testament of resilience, rested beside her. The dignity she had always possessed was now, finally, visible to all. It was not given to her. It had been earned. It had been forged.